Hey class, this is week 3 check-in video for Social Work 502, fall of 2024. Today is Tuesday, September 10th, and in this video, I want to talk a little bit about week 2 discussion on the neurodevelopmental disorders, and as well as talk about week 3, and we're looking at the mood disorders, depression, and bipolar. So, for the week 2 discussion on the neurodevelopmental disorders, I think you all did a really good job on that discussion. And several of you brought up some really good points about the challenges of clinical diagnostic assessments. And, Yvonne talked about cultural and language issues that can come up, and several of others of you talked about the, um, the Jillian talked about several diagnoses such as depression, anxiety being overused or over like being that like a fad that has been occurring here lately. And she made a really good point. Jillian made a really good point about saying, and I do agree with this, that it is a good thing that these disorders are being less stigmatized, but it is concerning if they are being um, overdiagnosed by professionals. And so there is a range of, in terms of when we're looking at the DSM, in terms of severity of any of the different diagnoses that we're going to talk about, that we're talking about this in this course and that we have in the DSM, that, there is the severity of them that determines, whether it is considered whether it is considered an actual, or the person can actually be diagnosed with this, or if it is something that the person might be experiencing, but is, we can feel depressed but not be necessarily diagnosed with depression per se. And and then of course, assessment includes so many other factors, right, that are important to keep in mind. And one thing that's really important to keep in mind or to think about is somebody had mentioned, and forgive me because your name I'm blanking on right now, but in their discussion post, they mentioned how, are we diagnosing things that we consider to be quote unquote not normal, quote unquote, on the normal, when in actuality could be something, something that somebody might be hyper focused on, that could then make them be really good at art or musicians. And I think that's a really good point. And are we overdiagnosing somebody with ASD because one of the criteria is the sort of becoming really hyper focused on one thing. And so one of the things that it's really important is to keep in mind that in the DSM, one of the, as I'm talking about, like the DSM and the criteria is not only the severity, but also part of the DSM criteria for a diagnosis to be made is this significantly causing an impairment in the individual's life, either at home, at school, at work. So it's really important to keep in mind that that is also part of that, the criteria for whether something is going to be whether somebody meets the full criteria for that diagnosis or not. But anyway, really good job. This week we're talking about the mood disorders, and if you'll notice in the learning materials, it does divide into two sections. So the first set of readings are on the depressive disorders. And then the second set of readings are on the mood disorders. If you go further down, there's additional recommended readings for mood disorders as well as for the depressive disorders. And the term mood, when we think about mood disorders, really, Morrison says that the term mood refers to, quote, the sustained emotions that color the way we view life, end of quote. And I really like that quote by him. It's the sustained emotions that color the way we view life. And so, again, it is that part of that criteria. It is a sustained emotions. It's not something that comes and goes. Like sometimes we might feel a little sad or depressed after watching a movie, but no, it is sustained. And so that's really important. So the mood disorders are the depressive disorders and the bipolar and related disorders. And the mood disorders can occur in people of any race, ethnicity, gender. We know that as many as, I believe, 20% of adult women and 10% of adult males at one point in their lives are diagnosed with either depressive disorders or the bipolar mood disorders. So it is something that you will, as a social worker, might be working with individuals that have been diagnosed by, if we're thinking about the depressive disorders, major depression, the disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, the dysthymia disorder, or if we're looking at bipolar, we might be looking at, bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. And so it's really important to think about how that we're going to differentiate between these two, and really, make sure that when we're working with individuals, that we are taking all of the different signs and symptoms and behaviors, and making sure that that they are meeting or not meeting the criteria for, because as I said, in there's different subcategories within the depressive disorders. It's not just major depressive disorder, right? And so you want, or with bipolar, is it bipolar 1 or bipolar 2? Those sort of things to think about, to take into consideration, that, that there's different subcategories within them, and that we want to be very careful about not making sure that we are doing a good clinical diagnostic assessment where we are listening to the client and obtaining as much information as we can from different sources, and then going back and looking at our DSM. But as I mentioned in last week's video, the DSM is not the be-all end-all for us as social workers. So it is important, if we're going to, to understand the DSM and understand, especially if we're working in a setting with psychologists or psychiatrists, where we are assisting in the clinical diagnostic assessments, to do this, and to be careful about how we go about it. And as I said, making sure that we're really paying attention to the client, understanding cultural differences, language barriers, all of those things that could impact the assessment. Part of it is also understanding the environmental context, right, in which a person comes from, the social, cultural implications from the individual's background that could be impacting the assessment. And we have to take those things into consideration. And we also look at those things beyond just the DSM, right? It helps us to we need to assess those things on their own, but we also need to assess them as part of how they might be interfering, or not interfering, but how they might be, what the impact of those things can be on our clinical diagnostic assessment. Anyway, all right. So the week 3 discussion is on depression and mood, and you're being asked to complete the readings and watch the videos for both on depression and bipolar that are part of the readings for week 3, and to read the Anita shared case. This is, I know you've used Anita in other classes. This case, though, this particular one here has additional information that will help you in for this particular discussion post. So it is not the one that you probably used in 501. It is in terms of like the base of Anita and her children. However, it has additional information. So make sure you read that. So you want to list the risk factors that you see in this case file for Anita, the risk factors for developing depression and suicidal ideation, citing and referencing one or more videos, describe why you think Anita is at risk for developing depression and or suicide, and using the DSM-5-TR and the Francis text, review the Anita depression example that you see here below for presenting the DSM-5-TR symptoms supported by behavioral manifestation signs and symptoms. You will do the same thing using the DSM-5-TR criteria. Make a list of the criteria for mania and support the criteria by stating next to the criteria which of Anita's behavioral manifestation signs, symptoms, or evidence of mania, and do you feel that she meets the DSM-5-TR criteria for bipolar 1 or for bipolar 2, and explain your rationale using the criteria. So in other words, you're going to see an example that is going to show, it's going to review and provide a clinical diagnostic assessment of just this one piece of the symptoms of depression that for Anita, and the so the DSM-5 criteria will be listed, as well as next to it the behavioral manifestation signs and symptoms that match that DSM-5-TR criteria for depression. So what I want you to do then is to do the same thing, but for mania. So you'll go to the DSM, your textbook, you will look for the criteria for mania, and you will jot down the criteria for mania, and then you will next to it, next to each criteria, so mania for criteria, let's say A, whatever that, may be, you will, whatever, you're going to write down the criteria, and then next to it, you're going to say, if there is no behavioral manifestation signs or symptoms that you can see in the Anita case file that you have here, if there is nothing, then you would put NA next to it. But if there, and then but if there is, then you would put what exactly the sign, symptom, or behavior is that matches that criteria. Then you're going to answer. The next question was, based on this, do you feel that she meets DSM-5 criteria for bipolar 1 or bipolar 2? And explain your answer for this using that DSM-5 criteria. All right, for either bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. All right, that's all for this week. So take care, and I'll talk to you all later.